these really destructive hurricanes, those will all intensify both in terms of their strength but also their frequency.
We need to move away from fossil fuels, and that absolutely includes gas, and that's why I am very glad that New York State is doing exactly that.
There was a couple of pieces of information that people stated here that were incorrect. Someone said that New York is moving away from gas. That's false. Natural gas and oil went from 77% to 89% of its electricity supply between 2020 and 2021 because New York shut down a perfectly functioning nuclear power plant. So New York is not moving away from gas. It became more dependent on gas because of the war on American energy. There was another statement that was made that hurricanes will become more frequent in the United States. That is also not the prediction of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It supports the notion of a substantial decrease, 25%, in the overall number of Atlantic hurricanes and tropical storms. So in terms of misinformation, we've seen some here today.
How viable is an energy agenda that excludes fossil fuels?
We're seeing it play out in my home state of California, where we've done the biggest investments in renewables by far. And we announced on August 25th that we were going to phase out internal combustion engines, and on August 30th, we asked people not to charge their electric cars between 4 and 9 p.m. We came so close to blackouts that they've been burning kerosene and diesel. And by the way, I share the concern with environmental justice expressed here. The kerosene and diesel that they're burning in California is because we weren't burning enough natural gas. In terms of the renewables, it's the problem with the energy density. We know that solar and wind projects require 300% more copper, 700% more rare earths. Wind, solar, and batteries require 1,000% more steel, concrete, and glass, 4,200% more lithium. Significant increase of the material intensity of energy. That is going to cause inflation. Renewables make electricity expensive for fundamental reasons. We're headed down an extremely dangerous path. We see in Europe and around the world, we're going to have hundreds of millions of unnecessary additional deaths from cold, from hunger, and from air pollution because of the war on gas. We reduced our carbon emissions more than any other country in history between 2005 and 2020. We reduced our carbon emissions by 21.5%, nearly 5 percentage points more than we had intended to under cap and trade or Paris. 61% of that reduction was due to the switch from coal to natural gas. The main barrier to the expansion of natural gas is the war on natural gas. President Biden is waging war on natural gas by refusing to allow expanded gas production on federal lands and offshore. His appointees at FERC are blocking the expansion of natural gas pipelines as well as LNG export terminals. The result is that we do not have enough oil and gas production for ourselves and to provide for our allies in Europe. We've been in this energy crisis for a year now. I was writing about the impacts in Europe a year ago. We should have been acting then to be expanding gas production to save our allies in Europe who are going to have rationing and industrial collapse this winter. Europe has seen its fertilizer production decline by 70%. This is bonkers. Fertilizer is essential to feeding a world of 8 billion people. We could only feed half of that number without synthetic fertilizers.
If there was a war on energy, how is Exxon, Chevron, BP, and Shell making over 200% profits? You can't have a war in an industry and then they're having record profits.
Why do you have those profits like that? Because you're stifling production. There is such a thing as supply and demand. You expand production, you bring down the prices, and you reduce the profits. That's what this country did from 2010 to 2020. That's why so many shale frackers lost their businesses or went bankrupt. The Interior Department distributed just 200 leases for oil and gas development during President Biden's first 19 months in office. During Obama and Trump, there were 10 times as many leases. No president since Nixon has leased out fewer than 4.4 million acres during its first 19 months in office. Meta, Facebook, Apple, and Google had profits of $39 billion, $30 billion, and $76 billion last year. And I didn't see this committee holding hearings on those profits, nor on the huge losses that the shale frackers had. From 2010 to 2020, U.S. shale frackers lost $300 billion.
We want to protect people. We want to make their health better. Fossil fuels are polluting communities across the country. So it's not that environmentalists hate people.
Will the actions that the administration has taken to shut down domestic natural gas production reduce emissions proportionally Or does that decision come with offsets from other types of energy production?
No, in fact, it's increasing air pollution. I mentioned the kerosene and diesel that's being burned disproportionately in neighborhoods of color in California. But also we've seen this is going to be the biggest year of coal burning on record, even though we had been reducing our dependence on coal both in the United States and globally because of cheap and abundant natural gas. Coal use is also increasing in the United States, even though it had been declining over the last decade.
Could you expand on the global humanitarian impacts, particularly for poor countries without efficient means of energy production, of cutting domestic LNG production?
It's devastating. We saw the government of Sri Lanka fall because of a food and energy crisis. We're seeing other governments are going to fall or be destabilized by high energy prices. People will starve. People will die because of expensive, scarce energy.
What steps do you think can be taken to avoid compromising ourselves to Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Russia, or other nations for energy?
Yeah, look, it's just as insane as it looks for Biden to go and beg the Saudis and beg the Venezuelans to produce more oil. It's also worse for the environment because you have to transport it. We should not be importing any solar panels from China. This is a fundamental, categorical, moral imperative to stop importing solar panels from people that are making them from effectively slave labor. We say we're concerned around Muslim rights, not showing it by importing solar panels. And much of the Inflation Reduction Act's expansion of renewables depends on Chinese solar. So this is a dangerous game that we're playing. These industries need to be repatriated. But I think longer term, we need a vision of gas and nuclear and hydrogen. These are domestic fuels that we can produce in abundance and helping to achieve both energy security, prosperity, and radical decarbonization.
I wish I had more time. You've been an excellent witness. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Europe was actually producing more natural gas than Russia was exporting just 15 years ago. And many people warned Europe, including myself, that it was becoming overly dependent on Russia. Putin calculated, and he may have miscalculated, but nonetheless calculated that he would not suffer the consequences of energy embargoes or energy restrictions as retaliation for an invasion of Ukraine, and that gave him the sense that he would be able to invade. It would be insane, in my view, for the United States to trade this remarkable security we've achieved thanks to abundant natural gas and nuclear for a dependence on the Chinese for solar panels that are just unboxed by American workers, not manufactured here. As I mentioned in my testimony, China dominates the production of not just renewables, but electric vehicles. There is a desire to repatriate those industries. We should do that, but we should not be shifting our energy production to China.
What real or psychological reasons do they have for disliking natural gas?
The war on energy, the war on cheap and reliable energy has been going on since World War II. It's been motivated by an anti-human, anti-civilization, Malthusian mentality in the tradition of the British economist Robert Thomas Malthus. It's a very dark view of the human species. It's a view of humans as a blight on the planet. It's a view of modern Western industrial civilization as bad for the environment.
It's more of a psychological thing than it is.
I mean, look, I think when you look at what's driving this, it's acting as a kind of substitute religion, complete with a new form of guilt, a new vision of apocalypse, a kind of fall from, frankly, a state of nature that never existed. This has been well studied by scholars over 30 years. The originary concern with fossil fuels was that they provide for abundant prosperity and the power of civilization. Before any concerns about climate change, there was an effort to repress fossil fuel development, particularly in developing nations like Bangladesh, because of the concerns of overpopulation. These were often racist concerns expressed, Malthusian concerns. That's how it began. Climate change is just the latest justification for the war on natural gas.